but I made it. So really happy to be in Tallinn, really happy to see so many old friends, new friends, and really happy to have a face-to-face discussion, although two of our distinguished speakers are connected to us online. So our last panel is dedicated to the new security challenges, climate and cybersecurity. My name is Marina Kaljurand. I'm the member of the European Parliament. In my previous lives, I was a diplomat and foreign minister. And in one of my previous lives, I had the privilege of chairing Global Commission on Stability of Cyberspace, where I had the honor and privilege to cooperate with Motohiro. But we'll come to that later. So one might ask, how can you put climate and cybersecurity into the same agenda point? But they are both new challenges. When I say new challenges, then climate older than cybersecurity, but both relatively new. They both need global approach, and UN is well suited to have it as a discussion point. They are dividing nations and people. Climate, as well as cybersecurity, because it's also an ideological question. They both need multi-stakeholder approach. These topics can't be issued only by the governments, but governments have to learn to cooperate with other stakeholders. When we discuss climate, we see how active is civil society. When we discuss cybersecurity, we see that we can't survive without private sector, which is the owner of critical infra and which plays an active role in that field. At the same time, they are also different. As I said, climate has been on international agenda for tens of years already. 2008, 2009, Copenhagen summit should be mentioned. Kyoto Protocol should be mentioned. Also the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Cybersecurity is taking just first steps in that direction. Yes, there are GGEs, there is open-ended working group, there are a couple of resolutions that have been adopted on the level of the United Nations General Assembly, but we do not have still digital compact. It's an aim of Secretary General of the United Nations, so there is a lot that can be done on the level, of United Nations. Both of these topics are also very actively promoted regionally. When I think about climate, I think about EU ambitions. When I think about cybersecurity, I think about the efforts of NATO, of the EU in that field. And with this introduction, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. It's an honor and pleasure to moderate this panel. Two of our distinguished panelists are here with us on stage. State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia, Mr. Stanislav Raščan. I'm not going to go through the bios, you have them. But what was very interesting for me, that you're a medical doctor. You're a career diplomat, you're a medical doctor. And these two professions do not often run into each other. We are used to seeing lawyers, diplomats, politicians, diplomats, but that's absolutely, it will be an interesting added value to our discussion. And also interesting that Mr. Raščan has been posted as a diplomat to Tokyo, to Tehran, to Vienna, and has served as president of the executive board of the Center for European Perspective and president of the managing board of ITF Enhancing Human Security. Online, we have distinguished ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Martin Kimani, who is permanent representative of Kenya to the United Nations and is joining us from New York. So good morning to New York. And Mr. Kimani has also been President's Special Envoy for Countering Violent Extremism and also the director of Kenya's National Counter-Terrorism Center. He is very well familiar with the work of the United Nations and has participated in the work of the UN Environment Programme and the UN Human Settlements Programme. Also connected to us online, we have Professor Tsuchiya Motohiro, so good to see you. And I'm going to use the first name because we know each other already for years and years. We have the privilege of cooperating together. And those who do not know Motohiro yet, he is the best, or let's say one of the best on cybersecurity. So whenever you have questions there, Motohiro is to answer. He's the Vice President for Global Engagement and Information Technology at Keio University and Professor at Keio University Graduate School of Media and Governance. And last, but definitely not least, we have Mr. Hendrick Urdahl, who is Director of the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Norway. In his former lives, he was the editor-in-chief, or still is. Was. He was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Peace Research and the former research fellow with the International Security Program at the Harvard Kennedy School. And Mr. Urdahl has a deep expertise in political demography. His research focus has been on impact of population and environmental change on armed conflicts, including security implications of urbanization and climate change and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can't wish for better experts to dive into this topic. As to the rules, householding rules, we will start with the introductory remarks by all of the panelists. Then I will give you the chance to reflect on what you heard and what you want to say about the remarks of others. And I really do hope that, guys, you stay awake and we will have a discussion, not only monologues from the podium here, but also comments, questions, remarks. I really hope it will be interactive. So having said that, I move to our first speaker, and Mr. State Secretary, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, in the times of pandemic, it's very good if you have some knowledge about the medicine, or sometimes, you know, even it's better that you don't have any knowledge about the medicine because there are so many fake news over pandemic. So cybersecurity is also very important because, yes, of this fake news and everything what is going on. But Slovenia always wanted to be second Switzerland, I think. So I'm very glad that we were discussing this morning also about our common candidature for Security Council. So Switzerland a year earlier and we next year. But in the last year, I think that Slovenia wanted to be also very close with Estonia, because also for Slovenia, we are thinking that we are the best size for the country being completely digital. It goes also together with cybersecurity. So we establish first ever UNESCO International Institute for Cybersecurity, and we are working very hard on digitalization of Slovenia. We all know, I was working as a medical doctor many years ago. I was working as a postdoc in the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto in genetic laboratory, so I know how advanced is Estonia in genetics, and Slovenia wanted to be also advanced in this field, but my wife stayed in the science, so she is collaborating very much with Estonian scientists. But I'm afraid, or I must admit that Slovenia was never focused so much to, let's say, digitalization, genetics, as did Estonia. We were always knowing and preaching, you know, what should we do, but we tried and we are still trying many other things. So I think that the same goes with our candidature for Security Council in 24-25. Once again, we have this experience. We were elected, but this was beginner slug. We were not even 10 years old country in 98, 99, but we were successful. We were doing our job. But, you know, we were neither a member of European Union or NATO. So as much advantages these two organizations have for Slovenia, you know, being at this beauty context, you know, there are also disadvantages, because now we must, and we are, of course, in the club with the rules, and we are defining these rules, you know. So democracy, human rights, free speech, free elections, and so on are base for our organization and for being part of EU and NATO, and we are trying, you know, the best way to explain our situation and our candidature. So I hope that we will be successful. But let me finish by saying that also during our EU presidency, so our first EU presidency was in 2008, our second presidency was second half of 2021 last year. So we were also working very hard on the environmental issues. We were president of the European Union Council during the Glasgow conference. So also during our EU presidency, water was one of the main themes of our presidency. So we still see that some basic things in environment as water, food, shelter, roof over your head is still very important for so many countries, so many people. And you know, with this crisis in Ukraine will be unfortunately more and more important, because if this food supply, which we all know now that 30–40% of the food, even for development cooperation, humanitarian aid, is coming somewhere from Ukraine and Russia, and it's almost blocked now. We will have many problems, not only in our countries, in our region, but overall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on what you said. You said that during your presidency and the last time you were in Security Council, water, climate were an important topic for you. I wish you all the success with the coming elections. But if you are pitching today Slovenia, what are, let's say, the words or what are the topics that's through which you want Slovenia to be known and to be voted for the next term in the Security Council?
For the one, as I said, which we are still striving to be, digital, green, and water, yes, these three.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like now to turn to His Excellency Ambassador Kimani. Ambassador, you have the, I can't say floor, you have the screen for your introductory remarks on this topic, please.
Good morning, everybody. Marina, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute for inviting me, as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me begin by saying that to congratulate Estonia for the term it served in the Security Council, and specifically your PR here in New York, Sven. I learned a lot from Estonia, and especially in light of the recent developments, I've started to better understand Estonia's position and some of the things that Estonia used to say in the Council. I just want to say that Kenya understands, and we very much stand with you. I will just make my opening remarks in relation to the Security Council and how it approaches these two particular issues. To begin, that of course all of you know that in December, just before Estonia left the Council, there was a resolution on climate and security that was brought to the Council and was vetoed by the Russian Federation. And it had a lot of co-sponsors. I cannot recall the exact number now. But there was also a sort of silent group of countries that did not co-sponsor. But the veto itself was not just indicative of a single country's decision, but rather, I think, spoke to some anxieties and worries. And some of those have to do, I think, with the linkage between the ongoing intergovernmental process on dealing with climate change, UNFCCC, and how that can link up to the Security Council. And for the countries from the global south, with the exception of small island developing states that had a very, very strong sense of wanting this resolution to go through, perhaps for the more just to keep the situation at the very top of the international agenda where it belongs. The anxiety is that the commitments on climate change adaptation are lagging, and that in Glasgow there was not much forward movement with those commitments, and therefore it seemed as if there was a sort of divergence where the countries, where especially the more industrialized, developed countries, seemed to want to keep talking about the issue, keep it very high up in the agenda, but in terms of action, to not do as much. Now, all of you who must be observers of the Security Council, so even as we ask, what can the Security Council do to advance these two agendas? We must first acknowledge that the Security Council is having a hard time advancing any agenda. And so what is happening is that there's more and more coming into the Council and less getting out in terms of solutions. And this, as Slovenia prepares its candidacy, I think is one of the challenges. It is easier to introduce issues in the Council than it is to solve the manifestations of conflict and insecurity that are caused by those particular thematic issues such as climate change. So it's something to think about. I don't have an answer to it, but it's something I think the audience may have, everyone may have their thoughts on how to approach it. So I would say it is going to be very important in terms of climate change to, as we engage this matter in the Security Council, to simultaneously begin to bring it up in the other processes. For example, in the UNFCCC, we can now begin perhaps more discussions, and in other international and intergovernmental forums that negotiate the global response to climate change, we can start to insert more debate, more discussion, and especially utilizing the science policy interface. We can also, I think, be more inclusive in how we approach the climate and security conversation. I have noticed, even though it has, I'm not saying it has not been inclusive, but I cannot help but see that it's an agenda that essentially the effects of climate change on security are being felt most keenly in regions such as Africa. And so it behooves us to ensure that African leadership is front and center in dealing with this issue. Otherwise, it becomes a sort of difficult discussion, because the countries that are primarily responsible for climate change are also primarily, their diplomats and their experts are primarily the ones discussing the impact of climate change on security. And when you talk to them about loss and damage, they don't want to discuss those issues. So we must bring more African leadership, more small island developing states leadership to the table. I'll just finish my opening remarks just by pondering very briefly on cybersecurity. And I know that our moderator and the professor have much more deep expertise in this. So I don't speak as an expert. I speak as a security diplomat, perhaps. This may be what we are now. First is we, as you all know, we have at the foundation of security is effective, competent government, and is the linkage between the people and the state, and the contract, the social contract. But the coming in of the hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, and the sort of state-led information operations mean that a lot of these, the linkage between the people and the state is now endangered by actors, whether domestic or foreign, who deliberately are using the cyber realm to cause confusion, division, and perhaps even hatred. Now, dealing with this seems to us key to sustaining stable democratic government, and doing so while protecting free speech and the liberties that we hold dear is a deep and growing challenge. There are two parallel processes going on. There's a powerful impulse towards lowering the digital divide and ensuring the world's population comes online to find the information and empowerment that they will find there. At the very same time, there's this growing disinformation and misinformation. And so we must somehow build into the system of closing the digital divide a more robust protection against these harms. I would like to just say that I think we're barely at the beginning of what is going to be an extremely destructive trend. And when I just look at the last few weeks at the sort of misinformation and information operations being aimed at the Kenyan people, I can tell and we can tell that there is a deliberate and organized campaign to make our minds up for us and to perhaps use that to put pressure on our government to take a certain position on unfolding situations. So I'm going to say that the challenge is certainly dire, and Kenya, here in the Security Council, we were inspired by Estonia's surge into this area by passing the first resolution. We followed up with an area formula meeting on the issue of hate speech and brought in the major technology companies. And they had a lot of, they were very positive. They said all the right things, but I was left ultimately with the impression that the solution may lie in the regulatory regime that we bring forward. And so we're going to need the Europeans to tell us how I think as a region, they have the most advanced regulatory regime when it comes to a regulatory regime that respects liberty and free speech and democracy. So it would be good to learn from you. Has there been improvement? And perhaps follow the progress in Europe and have a conversation amongst governments, especially governments that prioritize the spreading of the internet, but at the same time the protection of free speech. It would be good to understand what the regulators think and where the next frontiers are, because certainly self-regulation is not working effectively, even though these companies may want to, but their business model and the misinformation, disinformation, there's something there that has not yet clicked, and perhaps what we are demanding of them is antithetical to their business model right now. So let me stop there and just say that our common agenda by the Secretary General may offer us all um, a basis to have a conversation because he talks a lot about the gaps in cyber governance. And perhaps in the coming weeks and months, that may be where an effective conversation within the UN can be held. But thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Martin, thank you so much for your introductory remarks. And thank you for being optimistic, but also critical. What you said about the work of the Security Council, what you said about the new challenges, I 100% agree with you. But to follow up, you mentioned inclusiveness in different contexts. Inclusiveness on the level of states. I agree with you. If I, for example, look at cybersecurity, for years it was a discussion for rich white governments, and developing world, African countries were not invited. Today, when we talk about some security issues, it's still the matter of governments. And it's not in the DNA of governments to discuss with other stakeholders, to talk to private sector, academia, civil society. You as a diplomat, what would you say? How can we change the thinking? How can we really be inclusive on a state-to-state level, but also on a state to other stakeholders level? What is Kenya doing to improve contacts with private sector, academia, civil society on both topics, cybersecurity and climate?
Well, we're being very much led by civil society expertise. And it is clear when it comes to climate change, it is also clear when it comes to cybersecurity, that civil society, researchers, intellectuals have a very important input into this. I think in terms of cybersecurity, I would like to say that the problem is not just the lack of inclusion by the rich countries. I think it's also an issue of how much awareness and dynamism we show, because the developments, whether it's in cyber sort of biotechnology, artificial intelligence, a lot of the advances in these areas are being made in only a few countries. And they're extremely expensive to move that boundary forward. And so many countries, and I think many governments, they are aware of it, but they do not feel empowered to engage in the conversation. And yet, even if you don't have 10 artificial intelligence researchers in your country, what these people are doing with artificial intelligence will affect you. And so I think, to answer your question quickly, I think it is think tanks, researchers that can play the most important part in this inclusion, because they can, one, network amongst their counterparts throughout the world. They can undertake programs to make other scientists and other members of civil society more aware. And then they, in turn, will engage their governments more effectively. So I think the world of research, think tanks, and is going to play a very important role in ensuring there is inclusion, even in the intergovernmental forums.
Thank you, Martin. And you finished with experts, so it's a logical introduction to one of real experts on cybersecurity. Motohiro, please, you have the screen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good evening from Tokyo, Japan. So I wish I were there with you in person today. I really wanted to fly to Tallinn. But anyway, this is a new normal. Everything is hybrid and flexible. So thank you very much for having me at this panel. Especially I want to thank Marina, so my good friend. So and she says we work together at the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, GCSC. So everyone, between you and me, there's a huge continent, Eurasia. In the western part of the continent, we are witnessing a war. I could not believe what happened. A war in the 21st century? So Isaac Newton once said, I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people. So he talked about stock market, not about war, but many of us are thinking about the current war in the same way. And President Putin himself might be thinking about it in the same way. The development of the war might not be what he expected. The ground force is very slow. If we focus on cyber warfare, we are surprised at how ineffective Russia is. So 8 years ago, during the Crimea crisis in 2014, Russia was able to easily take control of cyberspace. They were able to shut down cell phones, disable drones from flying, and disrupt with disinformation. And in 2015 and 16, they even managed to cause massive power outage in Ukraine through cyber attacks, even if for several hours. This time, however, they were unable to do so, and Ukraine's electricity, telecommunications, and other infrastructures are still alive in many cities. This too is not a cyber war as had been anticipated. Rather, it is more of a cyber chaos. What Russia had envisioned would have been a one-on-one confrontation between Russian and the Ukrainian cyber forces. In fact, a diverse group of hackers from around the world, ranging from amateur to professionals, are participating in the defense of Ukraine and attacks on Russia. So groups on the Russian side have also joined this cyber fight, targeting governments and companies imposing sanctions on Russia. Never before has there been such confused cyber fighting. A social media resistance by people who had never been involved in hacking is also developing. The first smartphone, iPhone, was launched in 2007. Although there were mobile phones with cameras during the Iraqi war in 2003, smartphones did not exist, and communication lines were slower at that time. In 2014, during the Crimean War, cell phone communication networks were disabled and smartphones were useless. However, based on the experience of that time, Ukraine has probably focused its efforts on defending its communication networks. Electricity and spectrum are critical. Without them, smartphone doesn't work. This time, citizens everywhere are taking photos and videos and transmitting them to the world. For the first time in history, smartphones are being used as weapons in this invasion of Ukraine. It has been believed that Russia would develop a so-called hybrid warfare and easily decide the war, but knowing this, Ukraine has prepared for it. And while denying deployment of the US forces, the US government is helping Ukraine with intelligence and support for countermeasures against hybrid warfare. So at the beginning of my talk, I briefly mentioned the activity of GCSC. So we proposed 8 norms of responsible behavior in cyberspace. So Marina did a great job, actually. So the first norm says, state and non-state actors should neither conduct nor knowingly allow activity that intentionally and substantially damages the general availability or integrity of the public core of the internet, and therefore the stability of cyberspace. It might be difficult to define what is the core of the internet. I do not go into the details of the discussion, but what is essential at this moment is to ensure the access of the people in Ukraine as well as in Russia to the internet, to understand what is going on in each country and understand what both of them are thinking. Everything and every part of the internet to ensure the access is core of the internet. Access to electricity and spectrum is most essential. So I strongly hope the UN Security Council to endorse this first GCSC norm. Of course, small states must work together, make a strong joint voice, and push the permanent 5 countries. Now I am on the other side of the Eurasian continent, but I think the same thing as Ukraine may happen on this side, my side of the continent in East Asia. I don't think this is something happening far away. Now my university, Keio University, and other Japanese universities are preparing to accept Ukrainian students to study in Japan. One of my university's philosophies is I start history. We should start new history. Let's start our history together. We can change, we can shape the future for the next generation. Thank you very much. Danan Deitubberga.
Thank you, Motohiro. Excellent pronunciation, but people say that for Japanese it's easy to learn Estonian. So, but, Motohiro, you mentioned the work of the Global Commission. Maybe for the audience, I will just clarify that yes, we introduced a number of norms of responsible state behavior. We did not want to step into the job of the United Nations, but rather we wanted to add on the work that was already undergoing by the United Nations. But Motohiro, I would like to ask about another norm that we introduced. We discussed the role of private sector. Should private sector have the right to introduce countermeasures, the so-called hackbacks? And we decided unilaterally, it was our consensus decision, no. Non-state actors should not undertake countermeasures. Today we see that private actors, non-state actors, are attacking, are taking the role of introducing sanctions or countermeasures, whatever you call it, against states and governments. What would you say today about that norm in the present context?
It's a very, very difficult question, actually. So some companies, some commercial companies are helping, standing on the side of Ukraine. But other companies say so they want to be neutral, so they don't want to step into politics. And so the good example is the domain name system. So Ukrainian government asked the, I think it was AP, I'm sorry, so the domain name organization to stop the access to Russia, well, access from Russia. But they said, so their role, their mission is to keep the connectivity for everyone. So they do not discriminate the access to the internet. So this is an important thing for the internet community. So maybe some companies are influenced by politics, but others are not. So I hope many actors stay neutral and keep the access of the Russian people. So we are not hearing the voices of Russian people these days. And so we have to make the access for everyone in the internet. That's an important thing, I think.
Motohiro, thank you so much. And now we're turning to another expert, last but not least. Hendrick, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Marina, and thanks for the enthusiastic introduction. Thanks also to the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute for inviting me to take part in this distinguished panel. I'm coming to this debate about climate change in the Security Council from a research position, so I'm glad you emphasized that at the outset. I'm neither a politician or a policymaker. And while the topic, as you mentioned, it's new, relatively new to the Security Council. It's still older than cybersecurity, and it's been discussed in the Security Council for the past 15 years, roughly. But of course, it's been a discussion in the academic community and also the policy community for much longer than that, for about 5 decades, on the, not climate change necessarily, but on environmental change and demographic change and how that relates to security issues. I think it's fair to say that climate change is now well established as a topic which clearly belongs to the domain of the Security Council, and rightly so, in my opinion. It was introduced for the first time back in 2007 by the UK during their presidency. It has been discussed in different kinds of meeting, at least 20 times, not always as the main topic, but in relation to, and in both formal meetings and in area meetings. So it's been a topic that has been covered for a long time. A number of small states have been instrumental to that agenda. Climate and security was and is one of Norway's 4 pillars in Norway's now membership of the Security Council, and together with Kenya, Norway is now chairing the informal expert group on climate and security. As was mentioned earlier in this discussion as well, there has never been a thematic resolution on climate change and security passed in the Security Council. Similar to, for instance, the Women, Peace and Security Resolution 1325, which has had considerable impact on that whole discussion. That could have changed on the 13th of December last year when Ireland and Niger were proposing, putting forward a resolution for a vote, which was supported by Kenya, by Estonia, by Norway, and others. As was mentioned by the ambassador, it was vetoed by Russia, but it was also India was voting against the resolution, and China was abstaining. And so there is a sort of a broader also opposition towards sort of bringing security, climate and security into the Security Council. While I think it's important to, while at the same time as this attempt failed, it's also important to recognize that there are many instances where it's been possible to include language on climate change and security in specific mandates for peace operations, for political missions, and also in some of the regional and the thematic resolutions. So it's not so that there has been no recognition of this. I think in many ways that this record is arguably of greater political, practical importance than a thematic resolution, and it underscores, I think, which the ambassador Kimani was also referring to, the importance of considering climate change in the relevant contexts. At the same time, I would like to caution against also overstating the connection between climate change and conflict. The scientific consensus around these issues, as it was also emphasized in the IPCC 6th assessment report, is that the current connections between climate and conflict are both complex, they're context dependent, and they are quite modest. And there is a recent prominent study done on, published by leading experts in this field, including PRIO research professor and lead author of the IPCC 6th assessment report, Halvard Buhaug, where they've asked a number of experts to rate the known drivers of armed conflict according to their relative importance. And out of 16 different conflict drivers, climate change is only considered as the 14th most important among those, but also the most uncertain. And it was ranked, climate change was ranked after factors like intergroup inequality, that we also care much about, after economic political shocks, after corruption in terms of importance. And this does not mean that climate change cannot play a more prominent role in specific contexts, because that is important. But it's important. I would like to emphasize that climate-driven risks are small unless they are amplified by contextual factors such as high dependence on rain-fed agriculture, on intergroup inequality, marginalization, and on discriminatory land access policies. So these are the contextual factors that matter to climate change and security. And then it's important to also emphasize that even though this is our assessment of the current situation, things may of course change in the future as we see increasing warming. And that is something that we will have to take into account, and it's likely that climate change is going to be a more important driver of insecurity in the future. But I think it's just give three examples of ways of sort of nuancing and concretizing climate change and security. And the first, which I think is on everyone's mind these days, which is a real and an important aspect, is the way that climate change is likely to impact food security. That's a factor that's been quite well over time been linked to increasing instability and to violent rioting. We see already that there are, in areas like the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, the vulnerability to food insecurity is very considerable. And of course, this underlying vulnerability is now being amplified and emphasized with the war in Ukraine, which is now having a potential for making a huge major disruption in global food systems. Then a second lens or perspective, if you like, is one that is completely overlooked, I think, in the debate about climate change and security, and that's the way that armed conflict is a major driver of vulnerability to climate change. So it's not climate change causing conflict, but it's conflict causing vulnerability to climate change. And that is associated with everything, because climate change is a huge threat to human security. We know it's associated with a greater risk of economic collapse. We know it's associated with undermining government. We know it's associated with undermining the social fabric of society. And all of these factors are associated in important ways with stability. But the most important takeaway, I think, from that is also that minimizing, or perhaps the most significant contribution to minimizing the risk associated with climate change is by preventing and ending war, as easy as that sounds. And then third, there are these dimensions which about the climate, the debate about climate change and conflict that I think are problematic and in some ways also counterproductive. And most notably, that pertains to the issue of migration. Because migration is a very important link in the causal relationship between climate change and conflict. At the same time, we know that migration is not systematically or even dominantly causing conflict. And one of my main concerns is that, so we have this narrative about the 200 million climate refugees, which has no scientific foundation, but which is associated, which is also capturing a lot of the rural to urban migration that's ongoing. And my concern is that if we're securitizing that narrative with people moving from the countryside to cities, we fail to be able to provide for sustainable urban development in a way that can actually be counterproductive and leave urban dwellers in less of a good situation that they could have been in, resulting in a potential for greater disturbance and violence. So I think there are at least two important ways to be more nuanced and to be more targeted, if you like, in the discussion about climate change and conflict. One is that the whole debate, the whole international policy around climate change action is founded, is based on scientific consensus. And if we're not careful about how we argue when it comes to these linkages, we also run the risk of fundamentally undermining these policy actions that I think are tremendously important. The second point is that, which is my concern as a conflict researcher, is that if we're giving precedence to one factor alone as the most important, we may lose out of sight all these other factors that are also important for conflict prevention, and may even at the risk of discounting these factors and reducing our ability to actually stop war. And I think I'll end on that note. Thank you.
Henry, thanks so much. And also thank you for underlying the importance of scientific approach, which was also said by Martin. You're not a politician. You're not representing government. You can say what you think.
Exactly.
And trust me, as a recovering foreign minister, I can assure you, it's so good to be a recovering foreign minister and be a politician and not to be so careful about each and every sentence and each and every comma. From your perspective, Ambassador said that UNFCCC should be taken and should be discussed in the Security Council. Progress should be made there. We have Russia who vetoed half a year ago. We have today a very difficult security situation. How can Security Council advance climate, if it can at all?
No, I think it's an important question, and I think it's a hard question. And Ambassador Kimani is better positioned. I think he had some very interesting reflections. Of course, having ambassadors who also have PhDs in war studies from King's College, I think is a great advantage in that setting. But I believe that a major, if we want to act on climate change and conflict, it's important to try to be concrete, try to rather focus perhaps on the sweeping statements, try to understand where and in what context can climate change be important, where should we get that into language on the specific mandates for peacekeeping operations, for instance, in political action more directly. I think taking that route, which is perhaps taking down some of the tensions from these other arenas where we're also discussing climate change, can contribute to make it less controversial, less conflictual, and, in my view, perhaps more effective.
Hendrik, thank you. And on that, I'm looking at the audience. You're most welcome to intervene with your remarks, with your questions, with your comments. Please catch my eye if somebody wants to say something. If not yet, then I'll come back to the panel. Both representatives of government, both high-ranking diplomats, mentioned disinformation as a new challenge. And especially, Stanislav, as a doctor, you saw what crazy information was out there about COVID. We're not talking about security questions, but we're talking about COVID and what crazy information was out there. Do you really think that UN and UN Security Council can be productive in doing something on disinformation, or it should be rather tackled on a regional level? For us, it's UN. For us, it's EU, NATO. For Martin, it's African regional organizations. Where do you see it has to be tackled?
Please go to YouTube or wherever you can reach Ambassador Kimani's so-called speech on Ukraine. It is epical. It should be in every diplomatic book, in every diplomatic files. So we were admiring this speech as one of the best, you know. So yes, there is always opportunity, always in Security Council, in General Assembly, you know, knocking with your shoe and expressing something, or in eloquent diplomatic way, as Ambassador Kimani did, explain why you are not allowed, you know, to do whatever you would like to do, why you are not allowed to attack your neighboring country, and so on. So yes, also, as I mentioned, these digital opportunities, you know, there are also opportunities in Security Council for the smaller states to express themselves, to do the right things. And I think that in this way, you know, we can do, and it's only possibility for us to do something. So as much as this fake news are produced, you know, as much we can produce also good news, positive one, and we just we must not be silent, because, you know, this is the most dangerous one, because we are afraid that somebody will misuse whatever we are doing, whatever we are saying. So yeah, we need to try to work with think tanks, with scientists, and bring this on the level to the political masters, you know, to produce this in the laws, decision making, and so on, but also the same approach in the international organizations.
Stanislav, thank you for that, because and thank you for mentioning Martin's speech.
Yes.
So if I haven't seen, I'll go home and I'll see and I'll watch it. So I urge also all the other participants to watch the speech. It's so highly praised by another diplomat. It doesn't happen often, so it's a really great praise. But as to when we talk about COVID-19, I have to say that WHO did a great job when they were providing short, precise, information-based and very scientific, but saying it in a nice language that people understand. When we tackle disinformation in the EU, we have the, for example, East Stratcom Task Force, which started with disinformation coming from Russia, but has now expanded to COVID and much more widely. So Martin, my question is to you. Do you see the same tendencies incorporating regionally in Africa, or it still should be tackled on the level of the United Nations? Disinformation.
Well, I think it needs to be taken in all forums. The African Union and sub-regional organizations need to take it on. But frankly, a lot will take the lead from the conversation within the United Nations, because like I know Kenya's regulation of cyber draws very much from the European approach, which we have tried to essentially match and change a few things here and there. But if you look at it, it's almost the same package. So I think this will need to be done a lot at the United Nations, and then other regional organizations will also join and perhaps take from the principles and norms that emerge from the United Nations. I just wanted to quickly comment on what the State Secretary was saying very generously, and just to say that I think the non-permanent members, the elected members that Slovenia will come to be, as long as you have empowered PRs, and by that I mean the linkage between the foreign minister, the head of state or government, and delegation, and you are determined to speak in a bold fashion. And I saw some of that with Estonia in the 1 year we were together in the council. Then it does mean that an issue emerges in the council, and most of the times in the council is somehow boring. The issues are important, but it's just sort of people talking at each other. But every once in a while, an opportunity emerges when there's a pressing issue and the imagination of everybody is more open. And it's in that time that your delegation needs to strike, quote unquote. And so I would say this issue ultimately, because they require a lot of change of thinking, a lot of change of attitudes. It's not, the incremental approach must always be done, but ultimately the jump will be done by a delegation that seizes the moment and tries to assert an idea that perhaps was easier to resist before. And every elected member, I think, should come to the council with this mindset, and also appreciate that this mindset is somehow a risky mindset, because when you strike out that way, there's always a cost in the Security Council. And so that's just to respond, and hopefully when Slovenia comes, they'll come with this attitude. And all the best, State Secretary.
Thank you, Martin.
Marina,
yes,
so may I?
Please. Yes.
Yeah. So let me comment on the disinformation. So I'm always say that we should not do not fight fire with fire. So people say, so if somebody is sending a lot of fake news, disinformation to us, we should not use that kind of methods to counter those fake news and others. So basis of democracy is trust in government. If people think that your government lies, so people do not trust your government anymore. So democracies cannot use disinformation to counter disinformation from the other countries. So it's very difficult. So U.S. government is always saying persistent engagement, and Taiwan government says there's no good English policy name, so they are always responding in a very few hours to fake news from China and the other countries. And they add always add humor to counter message, because the counter message fact check information is somehow boring, so it doesn't spread. But if you add some humor, so it spreads a lot and faster. So they are using that kind of measures to counter disinformation. Thank you.
Motohiro, thank you, and I completely agree with you. It's difficult to fight with democratic means, anti-democratic disinformation and information campaigns, and I'm saying it as an Estonian. We have been under information operations from the first day we regained independence, so we've been part of that, we've seen that, and unfortunately now we see that disinformation campaigns spreading much more widely all over the world. I'm looking again at the audience, because I'm happy to talk to the gentleman, but so that you later do not regret that you had the chance. And there is the first question coming.
Thank you very much. I'm the Portuguese ambassador here in Tallinn, based in Helsinki, but also covering Estonia. And I go back to the climate change as a new security challenge. When we were last time in the Security Council in 2011 and 12, this was one of the topics in our program. It was, even in those days, more difficult than now. But I still remember that we had at least an area formula meeting, because we could not even have an open debate because of the opposition of one country that still opposes. I understand that there are sensibilities and different ways of interpret this as a security challenge. There are other things involved in UN dealing with this, other agencies dealing with this question. But my question to all of you is, how do you think small states that we are today discussing what they could do to keep this in the agenda of the Security Council, or to maintain this, especially the real challenges that are created by climate change here in the world and for our security? And that's just that, a general question. I hope you can give some more concrete answers. I know that there's already, as Ambassador said, in the mandates of the operations, we already managed to include some references to this, but it's still not a topic in the agenda of the Security Council. So what can we do when there's really a security challenge provoked by climate change, what can we do to put it in the agenda? Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you so much for your question, and thank you for reminding the extraordinary work that Portugal has been done and is doing, I would say, on both of the topics, climate and cybersecurity. Martin, I will put you into the spotlight, because you're an expert. Please answer the question of Ambassador.
Thanks.
That's the multi-stakeholder.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think this is also one of Norway's concern now that we're in. We have one more year. We have security, climate change and security as one of our 4 pillars, as I said. And I think it is important to keep up the activity, keep up the pressure. And I think aligning also, as Ambassador Kimani said, with civil society, with research environments, to try to get the message out there and try to, through the means that we have, and that can be area formal meetings, it can be, working with specific mandates where that makes sense. And I think over time building a case for why this is important, what the best practices are, what the key sort of areas of concern is. And I think that is, also an area where you need to align with the expertise, with the competence, and that's perhaps where, the research domain, the science domain deviates a little bit from civil society, which tends to have sort of very strong policy agendas. I think it's fair to say that perhaps the motivation among some civil society actors is to bring it up to the Security Council in order to give it sort of more leverage. And I think we need to guard a little bit against that, because that should not be what is motivating us. The motivation should be that these have real implications on the security side, but we need to be specific. We cannot risk sort of undermining our strong case and our strong arguments by being unspecific and I would say sort of not aligned with the scientific evidence, basically.
Thank you. And I see another lady. I don't recognize people behind the mask. Sorry.
Maybe you recognize me now. I'm Sanita Deslandes. I come from the Foreign Ministry of Latvia. And I wanted to make a brief remark. As you might know, Latvia is also aspiring elected member of the Security Council in the next round after Slovenia. But I would like to come back to the issue of misinformation and the links between misinformation and also security in terms of dividing societies being less resilient and prone to, let's say, potential conflicts or trouble. You asked that question, and I would like simply to sort of maybe provoke the distinguished panel into looking more into it. My own country was actively involved last year in activities in the UN. One was the cross-regional statement on misinformation and COVID. The other was a paper on media literacy, which is crucial. So my point would be, could I provoke you in looking into, can this be an aspect, because my country intends to do that and continue working on that, and maybe also in Security Council one day. How can we see these aspects linked? Broader than cyber, but just all the, let's say, digital space and internet and all the consequences that bring, and the security issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question and for your remarks. And now, we're running out of time, which means that you all will have the chance to say something in conclusion and reflect on the point that was raised and on anything else you would like to the audience to take with them from this discussion. And let's go with in the same order, yeah? Stanislav, you're the first one again.
Thank you very much. So besides Ambassador Skimani's speech on Ukraine, I remember also how the Canadian permanent representative was changing on the note verbal, which is also a very boring document, their view what really is behind the boring Russian note verbal. So yeah, I would also agree that fighting the fake news or misinformation should have at least a little bit of humor, and but should be realistic, should be right news. You know, you cannot fight bad news, fake news with fake news. But you know, 30 years ago, I was young. I was at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna for 2 months discussing with my colleague, who is now also senior in the Prime Minister's office of Slovenia. Shall we fight, you know, old communist system with their own instruments? And of course, you cannot. You only have democratic means and ways to fight old system and new coming bad autocratic systems and so on. And this is what we all, I think, need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you were referring to the note on the recognition of the so-called independence.
Exactly.
The Russian note, which first recognized, was it South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and now Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. So where only the names were changed. So find it. Thank you. Martin, your final remarks.
Thank you, Marina. State Secretary, you're still young in spirit and outlook. I'll say two things, and it's to say, let us get practical. On climate and security, the link between extreme weather conditions and security is so clear. It is as old as mankind. And Kenya has what we call an environmental soldier program within our Department of Defense. And these are soldiers who have training and the mission to rehabilitate environmental system and conserve environmental systems. As we input language within specific mandates on climate and security, for instance, the resolution we passed yesterday, 2628, on the African Union mission in Somalia, it seems to me that having a peacekeeping capability, a contingent of an environmental soldier, whose job it is to strengthen the linkage between the peacekeeping mission and the local communities. And in many instances, the local communities, whether it's in the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, the Horn of Africa, there are tensions and conflicts that are going on within the area because of the fight between water and pasture. So part of a peacekeeping mission's success is its ability to embed and win the trust of the people on the ground, even as it undertakes its peacekeeping or peace enforcement operation. So it seems to me that something can be done about that, and each peacekeeping mission can come with an inbuilt, and we're not talking 1,000 people, we're talking 3, 4, 5 specialists who make use of some of the equipment to dig up a shallow well or a shallow water pan that allows the pastoralist community there to not have to move in search of water. This alone can save lives and strengthen the peacekeeping operations. And I think we can continue to build a case that way, in a practical way, and approach it practically, even as we engage on the bigger questions. On the issue of cybersecurity and the question from our colleague from Latvia, I welcome Latvia and Slovenia to take up the issue of the promotion of fair inclusion of all people in your country. As the misinformation and disinformation grows, it is going to demand that governments become more inclusive, but not as a side issue. We argued in our presidency, our president came to New York to argue that inclusion should be regarded as a core state competence. In the same way as the state provides security, the same way and the same level of priority is inclusion of all the minorities in your country, for them to feel and see the state as reflective of their interests and their perspectives. If this does not happen, then the state will eventually be overwhelmed by the misinformation and disinformation that is picking at the divisions within your society, that is exploiting the feelings of exclusion and oppression by people within your society. So I think even as we talk about regulating and we talk about what should the companies be doing, I think states, legal legislators, constitutional dispensations need to evolve to become more inclusive. Thank you. And thank you so much for this invitation.
Martin, thank you. Motohiro, your final words.
Okay, thank you so much. So misinformation, so disinformation is overlapping, but somehow different. So misinformation comes without bad intention, but disinformation comes with bad intention. So try to manipulate people's understanding. So misinformation, people are just misunderstanding. So not so bad, but so disinformation is sent to manipulate people's minds. So and one more thing important is that so 1% is just false information, but usually 99% are true information. They are mixed. So if I always lie, so people don't believe me, don't trust me anymore. But people think that I'm a professor, so probably I will say always a good thing and right things. But I might 1% lie to the students, so they might be manipulated. That is important and that is critical. So always news agencies or media try to send right information, but sometimes they put 1% of misinformation or disinformation. That's a big trouble, and so we have to be careful. Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you very much, panelists. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Henrik, your final take.
Thank you. I'll be quick since I have a flight to catch in, I think, 45 minutes or so.
It's doable only in Tallinn. 45 minutes and he's still speaking.
Exactly. So just two very quick points, and I think Ambassador Kimani made a point which I forgot in my response to the Portuguese ambassador, that one of the real opportunities here lie precisely in making sure that global South and African governments and environments in particular are taking the lead on some of these issues, because they have the detailed knowledge about the actual impact on the ground and how to proceed. So I think that's one key point. Then on disinformation, I just want to say that I think we should use this momentum, even though now we reflect on the lack of capabilities on the Russian side, that they have actually succeeded in creating diversity and even regime change in one Western country, the largest one, over time. And I think it's important for us to now use the momentum to also reflect on how we can strengthen the regulatory environments and engage in a joint effort to limit disinformation campaigns going forward, because this is one of the key challenges, as I see it, to both democracy and stability.
Henrik, thank you. And with that, I would like to, gentlemen, thank you all for coming, for speaking up, for providing lots of information. Now we have a homework, a couple of YouTube videos to watch. We have a lot to think about, and you deserve a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dear friends, please don't leave quite yet. If the last session was dessert, then I think we still have a digestive on the menu.